Hello, MS&E 265 teaching team and guest judges. Today we'll be presenting on our 4 to 5 final presentation. My name is Arturo Cantu-Chavez and I'll be presenting on behalf of my teammates, which include Sri Harsha Angara, Anirban Basak, as well as Ritesh Patani. So for our product idea, we have decided to focus on a business-to-business platform that specifically focuses on the financial and personal data sector. Currently, individuals like you and I, we go to banks and financial institutions for various services. Among these services, we sometimes open up credit card applications with them. But before they make their final decision on whether we can be customers for their services, they need to look into our background and our relevant history in order to determine whether we can be eligible for a credit card. And so within a specific credit card application, some of the information that might be asked of us includes social security numbers, as well as government issued identities and other information that is related and tied to our identities. And so what happens right now is that banks and their infrastructures, they will reach out to data providers in order to verify this information. So they will request for our data using our PIIs, and the data providers will then use its PIIs to send the respective customer data back to the infrastructure. And so within the infrastructure, the banks use their own algorithms to then decide on whether we are eligible customers. And what they specifically look at is our identity verification, employment history, and then any history of fraud or money laundering. And so they have these checks and controls, and then in the end, they finally approve us or decline us in order to use our services. One thing to note is that the long story of this is that personal data is being moved from one side to the other, and at times this can lead to problems. And so when it comes to our specific problem statement, we came up with 3 components. The first one is that when banks manage all of this data, this leads to high operational costs and increased friction. Additionally, when they reach out to various data providers, this data is also fragmented and can be error prone. There's no standardization. And then lastly, recent compliance regulations such as Europe's GDPR, as well as the California Consumer Privacy Act, is now forcing these banks and businesses to change the way they operate and handle personal data. And in our additional design thinking, we supported this problem statement by interviewing these 3 stakeholders, which include individuals, data consumers, and data providers. And we used their insights and learnings in order to shape our problem statements from the slide before this. And so again, once we took our problem statement as well as our 3 pain points, we iterated on several MVP ideas, and in the end we narrowed down to one, which is to create an insight platform for data providers as well as small banks and credit unions. And so when it comes to how this MVP would actually look like, the current MVP would focus on no raw data transfer, and the way that this would be possible is by using open algorithms in order to translate this data into information insight. So the open algorithms are abbreviated OPA, and it is a recent MIT innovation, and Fortified happens to be the first commercial application use of these algorithms. In addition to this, once this raw data is then translated into information insights, our platform would then relay onto the financial institutions, and our API would then be able to communicate the information that the banks need in order to make their decisions on individuals. And so instead of a data provider sending raw data that could include sensitive information such as your driver's license number, our platform could then relay a binary output through the open algorithms, and it could look like a yes and no response. So it could verify that yes, that person is indeed who they say they are, and that is indeed their driver's license number. So for the market size for personal data spending, this number looks to be about $792 million for our serviceable obtainable market. It primarily consists of banks, credit unions, and fintechs, and is also constructed from several assumptions, specifically from market sizes and activities such as personal data spending. For our point of entry, we specifically want to target smaller and regional banks as well as smaller financial institutions because they're more nimble and more receptive to operational costs as well as other pain points. For the business model, once again, our value proposition is to provide instant insights, so information when the bank's needed, no raw data movement from one side to the other, compliance at no additional cost, as well as cost savings in the long run. For our revenue model, we specifically want to model ourselves as a software as a service. So a pay-as-you-go method where a subscription model could also be considered. And essentially where we would be making money is by doing a markup pricing per inside transaction. So essentially this breaks down to providers charging Fortified for information, and in turn, Fortified would then charge the banks a markup per the transaction. And so one thing to note here is that among our key partners would include data providers. So Equifax right now is actually promoting the Fortified services to end customers. And so in promoting these products, there would be some revenue sharing there in letting Fortified acquire more customers. And then one other thing to note here is that these are our customer acquisition costs and LTV formulas. The customer acquisition cost is the cost of sales and marketing divided by the total number of data consumers acquired. And then the LTV is the markup made with a discounting summation there. And then this will be multiplied by the average number of transactions with Fortified over X period of time. So for our expansion strategy, once again, our entry point is smaller banks and credit unions. We want to specifically focus on developing the front end and making our software as a service product more of a complete product where it could be potentially be adopted by the next targets from our SOM market. Additionally, for later stages within the market and within later stages of growth, we specifically want to target or build on integration capabilities and also more user cases and insights, specifically for larger banks that already have larger infrastructure and also have various other services. And then one other thing is, again, we want to continue providing the value proposition, and then also leveraging Equifax and other data providers to promote the product in other banks for other bank customers. For our one-to-end growth, for now we have several committed agents right now on board. So several fintech businesses in addition to Equifax and other data providers. From the opportunistic agents, we again also want to continue to expand and attract more banks, more fintech businesses, and then also include other data providers as well. And then in addition to both sides, we also want to take note that there are also other next-gen banks that actually start out as fintech. So Wealthfront was one example that is sort of within our target customers and is transitioning from one to another. And then the most important thing here is that we want to establish a holder ecosystem. So we want to grow the platform on both sides and really create a marketplace in the end where multiple banks can get all the information they need from our platform, and we can have the providers that they currently work with on board as well. And as we're growing on both sides, we can essentially allow the platform to become more stickier, and that will be the holder in our grabber holder ecosystem. For potential risks and mitigation strategies, for the value proposition risks, there is the risk that our pain point isn't a pain point, but our user interviews and from what we learned during the MVP design have shown that the pain points that we've discovered are indeed pain points. And then as we go into later stages, such as in the serviceable available market, we will also want to continue investing on integration capabilities as well as system integrators and tech partners, specifically again to target those larger banks and financial institutions. And then again, continue building on the ecosystem and drive standardization. Other small risks that include could be the execution risks as well as competition risk from other competitors right now that are also trying to focus on these three problem statements or on these three pain points. And then lastly, for our long-term vision, we sort of envision this inner product roadmap. The blue arrow at the top is what we've talked about so far. So it's really providing information insights without the data transfer and sort of mapping that development as it goes from one stage to the other. But ultimately, we want to revolutionize the way personal information is verified and shared. And so there are other product lines, specifically the red and green and blue arrows, that we envision that can be built on top of the same platform and could specifically address individual consumer data rights as well as enable a frictionless marketplace for the three stakeholders that were mentioned previously. And so this is what we perceive to take the Fortify platform from a good to great product. And so with that said, we would gladly welcome any feedback and questions, and thank you again for the semester.